Welcome back to the Go-Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone, and I made you a promise when I started this series that we were going to be giving you the latest goodness dripping from the fingertips of Tanium developers. And today is no different. I've got a good one for you. But before we get into that topic, I've got a question for you. Have you ever jumped out of an airplane? That's some risky activity. I have never jumped out of a perfectly good airplane, but I've worked with people who have. I used to have a manager who taught skydiving, and he did it all the time. And he's still with us. He's always landed to the ground safely. I had another coworker. He jumped out, started jumping out of planes, and after a few, he really broke his leg in a really bad way. I don't think it kept up very long for him, but we have a special guest on our show. I think he might have done some jumping, and you've met this guy before. He was on our Comply episode, but he's got a new role. So Lucas, have you ever jumped out of an airplane?
So I have not jumped out of a perfectly good airplane, but I have jumped out of a perfectly good helicopter while I was in the Army.
Okay. So you're in the Army. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I was in for 9 years. I was a combat engineer. I always kind of wanted to be one of the cool IT security roles, but they didn't have those when I was in. So, I did the combat engineer and the bulldozer stuff. Had fun.
Cool. So why are we talking about jumping out of aircraft? Because a lot of people do risky things and get away with it. And in IT, a lot of people do risky things, but they're not getting away with it like they used to, clicking those links and emails, leaving machines unpatched, using legacy operating systems in the environment. These are risky operations. And Lucas is here today to talk to us about a new Tanium module called Risk. And that's why the title of our show is IT Risk, Who's Keeping Score? And that sets us up for you, Lucas, to tell us, since we last saw you on the show, you've changed roles. Tell us about this new thing you're doing.
Yeah, so the thing I've been wanting to build it for a long time. And so what we build is called Tanium Risk. And really the intent is, what we keep hearing from our customers is, hey, Tanium's really great at getting this data for me. I can get the data really fast from all my machines, and I can see it in very specific contexts, vulnerabilities, lateral movement risk, things like that. But the request that we got was, can we take all this data and put it together in some kind of meaningful context? Can we do that? And if so, how? And so Tanium Risk is our first attempt to answer that question in the context of risk.
And you're right. I know when I first came to Tanium and I saw these different modules doing these really cool things, and I was thinking, and this was years ago, you and I both have been here several years. It's like, I wish they could do something together, because it's like what's I won't name any specific anime series, but name your favorite, series where all the things come together to make the massive robot, right, that takes on the world. So we can do that now with these Tanium modules.
Yep. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is, and we took a small set of modules first, but what we're trying to do is look at things that have affected our customers over the last couple of years, like ransomware attacks, advanced attacks, industry supply chain attacks, and look at how those problems came about in the environment. How did they get in? Was it a result of security hygiene? Was it a result of lateral movement? What are the risk factors to essentially just enterprise security hygiene that caused those things to happen, or that are related to those problems? And that's what we're trying to measure initially with risk. And eventually we want to measure all the things, of course.
And this really comes into focus with supply chain too. It's top of mind for a lot of people. Supply chain risk from software, particularly. We never thought about a software supply chain until recently, but I know what this module tries to do is kind of like you have your own personal credit score. It kind of gives your business a risk score for how chancy things are in the environment, how healthy is your security posture. So tell us about the scoring aspect of this and what goes into that.
Yeah, so we looked at a lot of products that are out there. We talked to a bunch of customers who have done this themselves. And what we heard kind of resoundingly was, it's almost always too complex or immediately overcomplicated and complex. It's hard to understand at a glance. And so one of the things we focused on was simplicity and a bounded score, right? So we have a 0 to 1,000 score. You have a score for every endpoint, and then you have an enterprise risk score. And right now we focus on the security aspect of risk.
So it's a score, and I'm in control of what creates that score. And so I'm thinking, well, what of our some of our viewers might be thinking, okay, it's a score, I can game the system, but I know from our previous conversations you said you've made it so that it's not exactly that easy to game the score. Help us understand that.
Yeah, so it's something we consider, right? You can't talk about this without talking about, can we measure things, financial value? Are people able to game the system? And so one of the things we do, and we'll walk through this kind of briefly in a demo here in a bit, but one of the things we do is we tell you, one, do any of the systems we're measuring have a issue being operationalized? Like, is it not working? Can we even measure from that device? And then we're also telling you, if we are measuring, or if we're not measuring it, but the device is healthy, are we not measuring it? So those two things effectively prevent someone from, for example, just not comply scanning, not doing a vulnerability scan. Because if you do that on an endpoint, we're not going to include that endpoint in measurement, but we are going to report that endpoint is not included in the measurement, and here's why. And so that's the first way. One of the things we definitely want to do is talk to our customers. We're going into early access right now. We hope to be GA in the next couple of weeks, and customer feedback is going to be really important to help us kind of move forward in what we do next.
So speaking of customer feedback, I opened by saying, we're always delivering feedback that we hear from our customers. What has been some of the feedback from customers and some of the early trials that we've seen?
Yeah, so it's really been, we've had an amazingly positive response for Risk, right? So the feedback that we've gotten has really been like, thank goodness I don't have to build this myself, right? I mean, this is what everybody wants, right? Everybody wants to be able to just at a glance, if you have 1,000 machines that have a vulnerability, tell maybe the top 10. You can't patch all the machines. You can't, put a new version of something on all the machines. But if you can do it for 20 machines, which 20 should I work on and why, right? So that's the question we're trying to answer.
Okay. Well, let's not waste any time. Let's dive in the console and take a look at what this new module looks like.
All right. I'm sharing now. Hopefully we can see the screen there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is Tanium Risk, right? We're just going to walk through a couple of things really quick. I talked about the score, but let's simplify it a little bit more, right? So the way Tanium Risk works is we measure. Right now, we're measuring some data. We looked at ransomware. We looked at a lot of security issues over the year, the incident response reports. And we said, okay, what are some of the really big things that are allowing bad guys to get into customer environments and that are causing financial and reputational loss and risk, right? And we said, okay, vulnerabilities being present on machines, right? Systems being out of compliance with defined policies. Systems that allow users, groups, have too much administrative access, or machines that have too many administrative sessions to them, right? Lateral movement risk. We also looked at, plain text passwords. Unfortunately, this still happens. Contractor, someone could have just plain text passwords. And if those are left on a file share somewhere or something, those contribute to many of these problems, right? And then expired certificates and TLS and SSL security issues. That's just the small collection that we're using first, just to, start measuring. And the way this works is, we measure this over time. So every 2 hours, Risk takes a snapshot of all of the scores across all the endpoints, and then it averages those into the Tanium Risk score. Additionally, customers define the criticality of all their assets. So you may have servers that you think are high criticality. You may have financial systems that are critical to you. So customers actually define the criticality of their assets, and that impacts the score itself, right? And the way that we measure what makes that score go up, we call risk vectors, right? And so we'll just walk through all this briefly. But yeah, risk vectors are effectively what are the things causing risk in your environment. And that's these things right here.
Yeah, I've never known anybody that kept passwords in a spreadsheet. Wink, wink.
Yeah, I cannot say that without my nose extending a little bit. So I certainly used to do investigation, and I have unfortunately seen it far too many times, right?
Wow.
But yeah, so here's how we do this, right? And we're going to talk about what makes the score go up, but we're also measuring things that make the score go down, and we'll talk about those as well. But if we look at system vulnerabilities, right? And so what we're trying to do is, remember, we're showing the changes over time. And we're showing that for a period of 90 days by default, just out of the gate, right? So every 2 hours, every 24-hour period, we record the state. And then for every 24-hour period, we create a snapshot, a final snapshot. And what that means is that for a period of days, you're going to see these changes. Now, for vulnerabilities, it's going to be probably spiky as new vulnerabilities are released. You patch and remediate. Hopefully that should be, kind of a wave chart. And the way this works is we have information here where we're trying to show, again, trying to take all this different data and show it in context, right? So here's a list of, for example, here are the riskiest machines in my environment based on just this vector, so vulnerabilities. So if I'm looking at this, I see this vector score, which means effectively these machines have the worst and the most vulnerabilities in my environment, right? We're doing that. We're also integrating with the other Tanium products wherever possible. So if I have Tanium asset, I can now look at the asset on this machine and kind of know more about it right here. And I could pivot into asset if I want, right? Additionally, you're probably saying, okay, well, what about the worst vulnerabilities? And so right now, we're also measuring every CVE that's found, but we're also saying, what is the score of that vulnerability and how many machines is it impacting? And we're using those attributes to create a vulnerability impact score. And that's important because just because something is a CVSS 10 vulnerability, if it's only affecting 5 machines, organizationally, that's not typically creating more risk than a 8 vulnerability that's impacting 20,000 machines. And so we want to elevate that on the list so that it's clear.
So if I see this, what's going on, then it's not just the current score, it's the score over time. So that's what the boardroom wants to see, right? That we're getting better. So this shows us then a list of the riskiest endpoints. And then as we go fix those, we can watch that graph, that score trend downward, and that makes everybody happy, it sounds like. This is visibility that customers, like you said, they've asked for us. Why can't we get all the things and going in one direction and make one big number, right? So we can know how are we doing? That's what Tanium helps people answer. Man, I really like where this is headed.
Yeah, and I mean, so also though, the other thing customers have asked for is better integration and workflow, right? So not only can I see these, but let's assume that, I need more information about these, right? So we don't want to do too much investigative work in risk, but we do want to integrate with the other products so that I can select these CVEs and I can go explore and comply. And now what's actually going to happen is it's going to pass a filtered query to comply. So now I'm filtered by those same CVEs, and now I can look at all the machines that have those vulnerabilities. I can look at the distribution across operating systems for that vulnerability. I could look at, all the individual results, and I can go and then get information about that vulnerability, right? And see all of that investigative detail. Maybe on the flip side, I'm interested in how I remediate that vulnerability or those CVEs. And I can similarly jump over to patch by selecting those same CVEs. And now what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at all the patches that I could use to fix those vulnerabilities, right? And I could say, only show me, things that aren't superseded. Now I'm down to one patch that fixes my top 3 or top 5 riskiest vulnerabilities in my environment, just that quick.
Man, that's beautiful. That's what we've always wanted Tanium to become, is this tool where I've got the report and I don't have to go, people do this with, point solutions today, right? They've got a whole solution that's going to show me the problem and another whole solution that's going to show me how to fix it. And then they got to put all the Band-Aids and duct tape to make those things work together. But here we have it in one console. You've got the report and then you can see, okay, here's what I'm going to, here's the details behind why it's busted. And here's the pivot to just go fix it, find it, fix it. That's the Tanium story, man. I love it.
Yeah, it's really great. And so this is the vulnerability vector. I'm just going to show one more, but you can pivot over to the other one. So if we're talking about administrative access, this is also something that risk does that only Impact really did before, and it's going to be a continued focus. But we don't just focus on just the endpoint, right? So we're also saying, from a risk perspective, which computer groups, which user groups in your domain or your forest, your Active Directory forest, which of those are obviously presenting the most risk? So obviously domain admins, enterprise admins, those are going to be pretty high up on the list. But what about users, right? And obviously, I guess I have too many rights in our environment and I'm up here. If I actually want to pivot over to see information about the user, I can do that as well. So now, instead of pivoting into comply or patch, I'm going to pivot over to impact, which comes with Tanium, right? Now I can actually see, why is this user account actually presenting risk? And again, from an executive standpoint, from a leadership perspective, you can see all this, but then the operational folks, the admins, can jump into that data and figure out how to actually fix it. That's
Wow.
huge.
So if you have a suspicion, I think most IT admins, myself included, just have this latent suspicion. You know, when I was working at customers, thinking there's probably some things I'm missing. I want to do a good job in my career. I want to really help the company. I want to keep them safe. I want to do a good job, but I just know there's probably some things I've missed. And because there's just so many servers, I can't keep track of it all inside my noggin. So this is kind of a health check really for organizations to see where are those gaps, and literally sometimes with just turning a couple knobs, plugging a couple holes, you can really improve your score.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the point. So one of the things, we're not doing it yet, but one of the things we want to do is forecasting. So we're going to add some info and some additional data to these little snapshot dots that actually tell you every time it changed, what went up, what went down. So that's forecasting. And also, like, if I say, well, I want to fix these 3 CVEs, how will that affect my score? So that's something that's coming. But, you know, we mentioned leadership, right? So another thing that's really important here is metrics, right? And so what we've also done, remember, we set risk up as a framework, and now we're going to build on that framework. And a big part of that is customer feedback, right? So like, what else should we measure? What other kind of reporting should we do? You know, if we take one of these, for example, we created a bunch of these by default. Let's say now I want to look at it from an operating system perspective, right? And so now I can actually see in my environment, where is that risk from an OS perspective? Like if you need to do a migration, or, you know, you're still have Windows 7 around or something, you can actually look at all of the individual risk vector scores across your operating system. So reports like this are also huge from a management perspective.
Well, obviously this is going to make the boardroom happy. It's going to make the people happy that pay the bills. But for the admin in the trenches, who's their manager just saw a demo of Tanium Risk at Converge this week, and now it's their job to implement this module. What do they need to know to get this working?
Yeah, so for our admins, risk is a new type of product, right? So risk is unique in that we treat all the things that you're already doing with Tanium as data sources for risk. So right now, risk uses comply, reveal, and discover, impact, and all the core content, right? So if you're already running any of those, we're just going to take what you're already doing and pull that right in. So there's really nothing to do in that case. If you don't have one of those products and you're just now operationalizing that, pretty much any CMI or kind of automated configuration is still going to get us the data that we need. It's minimal, right? Again, we've taken this simplified approach and tried to make sure that it's as simple, as easy as possible to get it set up.
And you mentioned an acronym, CMI. For those who aren't in the know, what's that?
So that is, I don't remember the acronym, but it's our automated configuration capability. So when you're going and you're installing a module, you can say, I want Tanium to just give me the best practice settings.
Okay. Yeah. Common module import. I think that's what
there you go.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So when I import the module, take the default config and kind of set it up for me. Yeah. And then just validate that that's what you need in your environment. Got it.
Exactly. So
All
the
right.
other interesting thing here, Ashley, is so for these, you know, these have different weights, right? So we're actually saying vulnerabilities way more than, say, TLS SSL issues, right? The way we're doing the vectors. And so what we're actually also doing is we're showing you what is the total contribution of that vector to your total score, which again is always 1, 0 to 1,000. But we're also showing you for your environment, what percentage of your risk score is actually from each of these things, right? So in my environment, I'm actually contributing 55% of my total risk score is from vulnerabilities. So this allows you to really quickly see, well, if I was going to put forth an effort just to try and work on one of these things, which one of those would give me, you know, the most return from my effort, right? So I think that's really important too.
Now, I know you mentioned earlier too that you could assign importance or to like critical machines. How does that work?
Yeah. So today, it's called asset criticality, and I need to change because it's an administrative capability, right? So I need to switch into my admin role. But whenever you set up risk for the first time, it'll ask you, what are the machines that you call critical, right? So you can go in there and you can say, my servers are critical. You can say systems with, this host name prefix are critical. And so basically you'll, as a one-time operation, you'll basically say, these machines are my most critical assets. These machines aren't. So we have low, medium, high, and critical. And those asset criticalities, which are, which you can dynamically change, those are a modifier on the score. So two systems with the exact same problems, if you've said one of those is a critical asset, it's going to bubble up to the top of that list instead of them being exactly the same.
Nice. So as far as the demo is concerned, anything else here that our audience needs to see before we talk about some other wrap up topics?
Yeah. So just one last thing, there are things that make your score go up that are risky. There's also things that you can do to reduce the risk in your environment. So it wouldn't be fair if we only measured the bad things. So we're also measuring compensating controls, and I won't go through them all now, but we have, several of these that we're measuring. We're going to add more. And compensating controls can actually reduce the risk score on individual endpoints. And so if you're actually doing system hardening, if you're implementing like the CIS benchmarks and things like that, then your score is going to look better for those machines and for those environments because that actually reduces the score. So we're taking that into account as well.
Okay. So we're publishing this show on November 10th, and Converge is next week. And I know this isn't quite ready for broad use yet. When can people expect to see this showing up in their console as a new module to install?
Yes, so certainly proof of concept POCs are going live now. So if you want to talk to your team and get into a POC, that's going. We're in what we call early access now. We hope to be GA released in the next 2 to 3 weeks at some point. And for Converge, we do actually have 5 intro lab courses that are, customers and attendees are gonna, and that's gonna walk you through risk, let you perform some activities and see it in a lab environment as well.
5 labs on
5
one new. Wow.
Well, yeah, one lab 5 times. We're trying to make sure.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
So one lab
Well,
5
good.
times. Right.
So plenty of chances to catch that lab then. Very good. So we've talked about what's in there today. This is a response to customer asks. Here's what we're releasing as V1, right? And this looks a little better than a minimum viable product to me. I mean, there's a lot of good capabilities in here. We've got a official release date coming up very soon. What's coming past that? What's next in the vision for this?
Yeah, so I'm a risk nerd and I'm a security nerd, right? And so when I look at this, I go, well, what about this other thing I want to measure? Or what about this other thing, right? And so the main focus for us immediately after GA will be adding additional vectors, right? So things like end-of-life software, end-of-life operating systems, things like PII, PCI detection. Are we detecting user information? All of the things that you can imagine can indicate or be an identifier for endpoint security risk. We're talking to customers and we're talking to our experts and seeing what we can add. So those will be coming. Additional compensating controls and reporting will be coming. And then really quality and workflow improvements, right? Like how do I, can I present a report from this data that tells my patch team, hey, go patch these things to get rid of the most risk, or hey, go deploy this software at this version to reduce risk in the environment. So those are all things we're looking at.
Man, that once again, just delivering on that promise to the customer that we're going to listen to them and give them what they need. And like we said, in the world of ransomware and supply chain risk and all these things, we're really raising the game of visibility. Because you can think about visibility on a per machine basis, right? And the team does that really well. But now we're giving you that aggregated visibility to see where do I really need. I've got this powerful tool in front of me. Where can I aim it to make the most impact then on my overall security posture? Fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah, our leadership has told us basically they want risk to include all the things, right? So as we go on with this product, we're going to be looking at incorporating all the data that makes sense, right? Operational risk, security risk, regulatory risk, right? These are all things that matter to our customers. And a huge, just like our other software, a huge part of what we do next is based on what our customers ask us for.
So as we wrap up, any final thoughts for our audience today?
I mean, just that, we're really excited about it. There's a lot of excitement. If you're going to be at Converge, come take a look, say hello. If not, POCs are going. We have an article on our community site. Certainly, we have some information that's available to the account teams. And so, if you need information, just ask, and we're happy to help out.
Well, Lucas, thanks for giving us a tour of this latest and greatest development dripping from the fingertips of our developers. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Well, Lucas, thank you for joining us and taking us on this tour of risk. And by the way, we're releasing this show right before Veterans Day in the United States anyway. And Tanium actually employs a lot of veterans. So we'd like to thank you wherever you are, where you've served to protect freedom and liberty at home and abroad. Thank you for your service. As we wrap up the show today, let's talk about some of the takeaways for risk. So number one, Tanium is responding to customers now, taking that to a whole new level. And you can go in, you can tag those critical servers, and you can get that visibility now aggregated like you couldn't before with this composite risk score by endpoints. So you can see the individual endpoints, but then the whole all up average risk score for the whole place. And then you can use these reports to target your remediation very specifically in the environment. And then you can watch that big number get better. So we have a couple calls to action for you today. So number one, if you would like to trial this in your environment, that's pretty easy to turn on. So talk to your account team about getting a proof of concept, a POC for this new module and capability in your environment. And because we're releasing this show before it's not quite production yet, you'll see that if you go to docs.tanium.com, remember that's one of my favorite websites, docs.tanium.com, you can go out there. You won't see risk listed, but early days, you can just search for the word risk. You can find the docs, read through those, get an idea of what's coming here in the few weeks before it's actually production ready. And then, like Lucas said, we've got a lab at Converge next week. We're wearing our Converge t-shirts. Looking forward to meeting with you online. We've got several interactive opportunities to meet you and hear from you as we work through the labs and the breakouts with the product teams and so forth. And as usual, we have a community article at community.tanium.com, right? One of my other top 3 favorite Tanium websites. So if you go to bit.ly/Tanium risk score, that's case sensitive, that's going to take you to an article by Julie Grunwald, who's one of our new PMs, who's leading this effort for risk. And she's really passionate about that. And actually, I think she's going to be coming up on the Go-Tanium Endpoint Explorers over on our Twitch live stream at the end of the month of November. So you want to make sure to check that out as well. Also, down the links at the bottom, you can interact with us over in the community forum or email us at go@tanium.com. And speaking of Converge, we're releasing this episode right the week before Converge. It's not too late. The labs are closed, but now it's a free registration. So go sign up today. Have you not registered for Converge yet? We've been talking about this for months. Go register if you've not done it already. Even if you can only check out a couple sessions, there's going to be some fantastic. We've added a whole roster of new keynote speakers. There's going to be a lot of those breakouts, hearing about what's happening with risk and other new things that are coming. Sometimes they even offer some surprises that we employees haven't even gotten wind of yet. So there's lots of cool things there. And you can hear from other customers. You're going to get to hear from other customers who are presenting in some of these breakouts where they're really maximizing what they're getting out of Tanium and really making a big difference in their environment. So you can hear from them from a business thought perspective and what it's doing that way, but also from an admin perspective. What are some of the tactical things that we can do as Tanium admins to really help protect ourselves, protect our company, protect our livelihoods? So thank you for joining us for this episode of Go-Tanium Tech Talks, IT Risk, Who's Keeping Score? And we'll see you next week at Converge. And until next time, Go-Tanium.